In March of 2024, I began posting to my public Instagram account at Spazzatic Studios Creations after a year of being totally radio silent. I had been diagnosed 3 years prior with a soft tissue tumor, which was growing steadily and abnormally in size, but for which no concrete treatment plan was available. After suffering serious complications for what should have been a routine cryoablation, I entered palliative care having been partially disemboweled, and I began a 9-month fight for my life, which has left me permanently disabled. There is no gentle way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I'm supposed to be dead. And so when I came out of palliative care, I spent 2024 getting my bearings, having realized that the life that I had painstakingly built for myself had crumbled in the wake of having had cancer. I had nowhere to return to, and I had nothing to look forward to, and out of desperation, I began posting to Instagram. The goal was never to go viral or garner attention. I just wanted some aspect of my life over which I felt I had control. I wanted something to call my own, which nobody could have taken away from me, and for my entire life, the only thing that's been consistently my own has been my art. I thought I was returning to my roots, since drawing was the only piece of myself that had successfully survived cancer, or so it seemed, but what followed was an absolute nightmare. My name is Cynthia, and you know me as Spazz, and I want to tell you the story of Spazzatic Studio from start to finish for the first and last time. Let's talk about how my 2024 went, and whether or not I'll be sticking around to finish out 2025 as a public figure on the internet.
Studio.
Originally, I was prepping a critiquing old art video to post to the second channel to fill the gap between a sociological experiment I've been doing and my thoughts on Donna Beneviento for this month. And then an ex-coworker reached out to me to share something really interesting that she'd found. She's still in the design field and was suggesting art communities that I could do reaction style videos to. And after Googling me for fun, she sent me to a link to a thread on r/artisthate about my art and asked me what I wanted to do with the information that we had found. And so I did what any morbidly curious person might do. I Googled myself. For starters, it was a little disturbing. It's strange enough when people take your content and make fun of you online for all to see. But the last year has seen people digging around for my personal information to turn me, Cynthia the person, into some sort of example. And although I started off genuinely bothered by everything that I had seen, by the end of the day, I was genuinely kind of intrigued. I think it's funny how emerging artists often get icy reception from the online community and how much of that reception now is accusations of AI. And I remember a time, because I'm old, when accusations used to fly around a lot about tracing or using bases. Everybody you didn't like was accused of tracing. And that's not me throwing a pity party by saying that I'm the victim of a witch hunt. But the tone of the posts in r/artisthate made me aware that certain trends regarding artist popularity in the online space have remained the same. And sociologically, because let us remember that my degrees were sociology related, this is interesting. I didn't get 3 college degrees for nothing. The anthropology of online communities is a big interest of mine. And so this trend piqued my interest because what else is being said about emerging artists online? And more importantly, can we find any parallels that could suggest a trend? And so I asked myself when I sat down to script this, what was this video becoming? What was the point of including this Reddit in a video where I had meant to critique my own art? In the wake of what I think is the peak of AI content flooding internet platforms, and I've worked in the design industry, like I've seen firsthand how the technology is disrupting our careers as artists. I've been taking notes for future videos. I want to understand if there is a way to ethically use AI in the industry as controversy after controversy unfolds in the court of public opinion. And so I realized that if I were to combine an essay on the ethics of AI and a video about criticisms I'm laundering towards myself, as well as criticisms laundered by others, we would be here for like 5 hours. And so I shelved the art critique again. Because now what? Do we just make the video about AI? Do I feel like I'm guilty of a crime that warrants over explanation? And most importantly, is deep diving into what people say about you ultimately doing more harm than good in terms of damaging your mental health? And I know that that feels like a dramatic statement, but think about how difficult it is to receive criticism the normal way. If somebody just comes up to you and tells you that they don't like you or that they don't respect your work ethic. And so now imagine that it's a bunch of random people on a subreddit devoted to quote unquote artist hate, fantasizing about all the ways that you are not who you say you are. It's a lot to take in, and it was genuinely a lot to take in. A lot of what was said was hurtful, and it had nothing to do with art. It's become, I think, an echo chamber of people who just don't like me. And that's fine. Like, you don't have to like me. But seeing the threads from 7 months ago explained, all at once, a lot of the abuse that I dealt with in 2024. And suddenly I realized I wasn't feeling jaded and depressed going into 2025 for nothing. Something had been brewing. And the thing that's been brewing is something I've been wanting to get off my chest for a year. When the Redditors found my TikTok today, March 12, 2025, I decided that I did need to make this video for me because I'm tired and I can't continue if this is how we're going to treat each other. In the past, I've always felt a need to explain myself to the fullest in the wake of AI accusations, and oftentimes I've nuked any content that people don't like because I feared persecution. But what I've learned is this: persecution will come, because not everybody will like you, and you can't convince people to like you. Being willing to believe evidence and the likability of the person presenting it go hand in hand. There's a reason that there's professional PR people celebrities hire when they're the subject of bad news. Optics are important. And now that my frontal lobe has neared development, oh my god, I think that nuking content is less helpful than I used to think it was. For example, when it was pointed out to me that one of my reference photos was AI and I hadn't noticed, I removed the content. I thought that was the morally correct thing to do, but without explaining why I removed the content, it was disingenuous and cowardly. I felt stupid when I realized that, yeah, the reference picture was very obviously AI, and as such, it was only normal that people thought that there was a possibility that I was therefore tracing. At the time, I didn't care where my references came from. I thought that Google Images was just good enough. I should have done better, but I was ignorant, and I'm sorry. It was a good experience because I learned what an AI detector is to vet images, and so now I'm a lot more selective about what reference images get used, if they can be traced back to an original poster, and most importantly, I credit everything I use. And so now I put images I find floating around on the AI detector to make sure I'm not supporting a machine which exploits artists, and I make sure that I can figure out from whom these images came from so that I'm not taking credit away from anybody else's hard work. And when people were upset about me using 40 Hara's iconic character as inspiration because I hadn't credited them, I simply took down the content. I was more upset at the fact that people said I was ripping off 40 Hara when I was just earnestly copying their style. I was a directionless artist at the time that I drew that, which is some point pre-2023, because I found it in like a super old Google Drive folder. And I should have been clearer on crediting the super famous artist. Like, It was an obvious mistake. It was my fault. It shouldn't have taken me being dragged through the mud to realize that I wasn't crediting properly. Like, just credit people. And so these experiences have helped me to grow. I sincerely believe that when I started posting, I was coming from a place of ignorance. My thought process was, why should I care who gets credited or where my reference images come from? Like, that's not a healthy mindset. It's not correct. And so I can take accountability for that. And so at this point, I've been circling the drain of what this video is supposed to be about, because I'm forcing myself to face the missteps of my career and think about how to avoid them in the future. It's not just about critiquing the old art, it's about critiquing the old business practices as well. I don't want these missteps to be a trend, ever. I'm tired of being chased across platforms by my own actions, which were objectively wrong. And so today, for the sake of understanding me a little better, because I do want us to have a foundation of trust and mutual respect, we'll critique my own art, and we will see what Reddit has to say about it. In the process, I'll reveal to you what I've learned about operating with integrity. And this is my way of showing you that my art is not just for clicks. It's an extension of me. I want to share every part of myself with you, and taking accountability in the face of AI accusations is important to me, to show that I'm making art from a genuine place, not a place of mass production. This video doesn't have a trigger warning, which is nice, but we're not going to be talking too much about unnerving topics. I do want to warn you, we're going to talk about the nature of the threats I've received, as well as about how and why I was doxxed in 2024. So if you're sensitive to conversations about bullying, you might feel like this isn't the video for you. And I do have one more disclaimer. I'm going to make the people in the Reddit threads anonymous. Please do not attempt to find out who they are, interact with the thread in any way, or hurl any disparaging comments towards the posters. If you do so on my behalf, we are not friends, and I disavow you. Any negative action on your part is negligible, and I do not endorse it. This video is not meant to antagonize these individuals. I'm really serious about not jumping to my defense. Often when people have tried, they get accused of AI tracing, or people make attempts to harass them, and it's not worth putting yourself in the line of fire. So apart from that, if you're here to yell at me about AI, leave me alone. I would like to put out this statement once, and this is the last time I'm gonna do it. I have made everything that you have seen thus far with my own two hands, and I will continue to make it unless by some miracle I hire staff to help me out. Assume that it's just me keeping the lights on. I can see Procreate's analytics, and I know I spend a minimum of between 13 and 20 hours per piece. I deserve a basic level of respect. I welcome you to block me on everything, if indeed you feel that you just don't like me. I'm not here to convince you to like me. Trying to find out where I work, being openly antagonistic in the comments, sending me mean emails, or threats of any kind. Not acceptable. Do not do it. These conversations, while sometimes stemming from a genuine place of concern for people who are rightfully concerned about AI, often unravel, and I don't really want to be on the receiving end of harassment again. And so, with the basis of healthy communication established, I want to talk to you now about 2024. So, something I wanted to start with actually was my somewhat meteoric rise to virality. In the span of about 3 months, I had hit 10K, and I was gaining hundreds of followers a day. And while that does sound like a dream come true to a lot of people, it gave me no time to acclimate to Instagram as a platform, and I didn't really look into the norms of being an online artist. Just like industry norms, the norms regarding how artists interact with their audience changes. I consider social media to be part of the art industry because although people can have independent careers where you're not clocking in at a studio job, you're still making a living posting to the internet. the web is part of the art industry. Where I think the divide between real life and online lies is in the way that social norms among artists tend to change. Not to go full pretentious, but if you're familiar with the social contract, allow me to wax poetic for a moment. The social contract, when boiled down, is an agreement, often unspoken, among a society which dictates its norms. For example, we all agree that theft is wrong. We don't spend our Sundays burglarizing houses because we agree that that's objectively a bad thing to do. And this stipulation keeps our society in line. Setting aside the actual written laws for a second, it's based on a collective agreement to not steal from each other. The social etiquette, if you will, of online communities versus IRL communities are often very different, even within the same fandom. So take, for example, the influx of post-COVID Zoomers allowed in in-person fandom spaces, who have begun to draw ire from an older and better socialized pre-pandemic crowd of adults. The norms of these offline and online spaces are beginning to unsync. But when I looked into it elsewhere on the internet, a lot of criticism is lobbied at post-pandemic participants in fandom culture. And what's interesting is that many of these issues are not new. It's simply repackaged. People have been litigating the social etiquette of fandoms and cons since I was a kid. And that was a while ago. But it's a bit like the tracing versus AI scandals. Same issue, different fonts. But my point is that the norms around the focal point of a certain sphere are bound to be different, even when the medium is enjoyed both on and offline. And so the heart of this introduction is to point out to you that in addition to having criticisms, like I said, of my older works, I also have criticisms of the way I manage my presence on social media. For 3 years, I was in cancer treatment, and so I didn't post anything to the studio page. I was very much in my realism era before I disappeared, having made the conscious decision to pull back from anime style because I felt that it wasn't significant pop culturally, and I was afraid of seeming unserious as an artist. Arguably, anime is always trending pop culturally, but after investigation in the circles that I ran in, it became clear that people preferred art advocating for social change in the midst of a global pandemic. And yeah, absolutely fair. And so mid-college degree in the sociology faculty, I had shifted my focus from the art that I wanted to make and the art that I thought would do well in the interest of making money. And so when I realized that I wasn't happy anymore drawing real people, I decided the best thing to do would be to delete everything off Spazzatic Studio and just worry about cancer. And so I did. But the issue with that is that I got so swept up in being disemboweled, as one does, that I wasn't planning any kind of comeback at all, because I was pretty sure that I was gonna die. Like, you don't really go into palliative care for nothing, you know? And so social media management, which is difficult and requires a lot of mental energy, was not really on my to-do list of things to worry about. I probably didn't engage with Instagram's For You page or platform for upwards of 9 months because when I would be on my phone, I was arranging my care or telling my loved ones how to prep me for my funeral. It was a shitty time. There was not really much time to just kind of fart around on the internet. I wasn't in the best place with my art. I had no idea what I wanted to pursue. I had given up really on being an artist because during the pandemic, I had planned to eventually do a master's degree, and I wanted really desperately to secure funding at a prestigious university. And so with that goal basically having dictated my life pre-cancer for so long, I had accepted that my post-cancer life would be devoted to my new career in education, if indeed I made it out alive. And so when I did come out of palliative care and I was jobless, penniless, and had no means to return to school, I was extremely confused as to how I was alive and what I was supposed to do next. And I was actually checked into a mental hospital because of the trauma of it all. And I realized that between experiencing anxious psychosis and just the lasting power of CPTSD, I didn't have these foundational plans to turn to anymore. I had worked myself nearly to death, even working full-time in education in the middle of having this tumor, because I thought that this concrete vision of what I wanted my life to be like would be there when I recovered. And it was sobering and horrible to find that no, I couldn't continue pursuing my passions because it just wasn't feasible anymore. And so eventually, by the time March of 2024 rolled around, I decided to start posting on Instagram again. It was the eve of my birthday when it dawned on me that I had been dabbling back in anime style here and there post mental hospital, but I hadn't posted anything. And I mean, I had like 4 followers. My thought process was kind of, what is the point? But eventually I mustered the courage to announce my return to all 4 of the followers, and I threw up a line art photo of my mascot. And so now I had begun digging through my Procreate files for something to render. I had already been taking art classes online because I wanted to learn from the artists that I loved. I stalked Google Images to see what was trending under the cute anime girl tag, and I made a Pixiv account again. And so the last course I took was actually Kamochiru's. Without her art, I probably wouldn't have had much motivation to seriously start learning how to render. And since I hadn't actually interacted with social media as a content creator, I was unaware of the industry norms that had developed while I was gone. And so I was unaware of the hypervigilance around AI that had developed. And what I really wasn't keeping track of was the equally meteoric rise of AI quote-unquote artists that were beginning to pose serious problems for platforms where artists compete for attention. It was an issue I should have been cognizant of, but I didn't feel a duty to really look into it. I didn't think my account with less than 10 followers for years was going to explode into 15K under a year. My experience with AI had been Wombo AI mid-pandemic, and then Waifu Lab in 2019, and both of those, at the height of their popularity, sucked. So I thought, surely, I don't have to vet the quality of images that I would find on Google Images as references, because these AI generators suck. How bad could it be? And so I wasn't really posting for attention. I just wanted to get back out there and have something to do that wasn't being extremely anxious and going to post-op appointments. I wanted to reconnect with my artistic endeavors to feel like me again, and posting seemed like a good start. It was my way of forcing myself to get back into art seriously and create something meaningful. And so imagine my shock when 10,000 people joined me on my misadventures. It hadn't even been a full 3 months of posting when it seemed like I could not stop gaining followers to the tune of hundreds per day. And this was the beginning of the troubles, because I immediately felt extreme pressure to perform. When you're a noob at internet notoriety and you feel like you have to please everybody to hold on to your audience, this is where the sloppiness, regrettably, begins. I didn't care how I got the content out, just that it got out, and it needed, or so I thought, to be perfect. And so no works in progress, no sketches, no missteps, just copy, what seemed like it would be popular. And Reddit did notice this. The original criticisms of people from 7 months ago were that I wasn't posting speed paints or whips, and yeah, that's an extremely necessary thing to post nowadays because of the climate of AI online. And this is where I genuinely do have things to confess to. I let everybody's perceived opinion influence how I was posting, and it made for a super confusing hodgepodge of posts that I would put up and take down, and then put up and then modify and then take down. And when you're doing the putting up, taking down, back and forth thing, it tanks your credibility. I was trying to skirt around the feelings of people who, no matter what I did, were just never going to be pleased. And it created a rift between me and my genuine audience, because it gave the impression that I was always scrambling to cover something up. And I shouldn't have let it get that severe. I should have been just secure in my knowledge that it was my art being posted. Instead of nuking, for example, the 40 Hara reproduction photo or the AI reference picture, I should have just been honest. I didn't bother to check if the reference was AI, and that was my fault at the time. I didn't bother to mention I had redrawn a 40 Hara picture. That was my fault at the time. I could have just been honest about it and tagged 40 Hara. Like, not only was it stupid, it was negligent. I have since learned. And the severity of people's reactions, of course, ranged, but I shouldn't have publicized it because I think that it emboldened people to continue to make threats. The more that I shared the hateful messages that I was getting, which ranged from everything to death threats to grape threats. I have to talk in a coded way on YouTube. It became like a fun game where every month a handful of people who I suspected where the same people on alt accounts would extort the AI accusations in order to be nasty. The doxing specifically was in response to my drawing of Robin because I changed the hair color and a devoted Honkai Star Rail fan just didn't like it. Luckily, they contacted a job that I was no longer at, but it was still a scary situation. I considered taking down my professional LinkedIn for my day job out of desperation. I took down everything that I had ever posted with my face in it to social media because I felt especially unsafe when people started to then target my toddler nephews just for being related to me. And all this was just over me changing the color of Robin's hair. Other people called for me to be doxxed because they thought I was lying about interning and going to college for art. There was one person who sticks out in my mind because she had been DMing people in my comment sections to tell them that I was a secret 13-year-old because she thought I was lying about having gone to art school. I was getting messages from folks who were being harassed night and day, like by that person, just for daring to know me. And when I asked that person to stop, she said she would only stop if I posted my CV to Instagram. And like I've spoken about in my videos, I haven't worked in art professionally between 2016 and 2024. And so even if I posted my CV, like I was teaching professionally, I was tutoring, I did an internship in office management. You wouldn't like have a paper trail of me working in the industry until October 2024 when I got an industry job, like a day job. And so part of the reason I started YouTube was because I figured it would be fun and educational to show how I got to this point in terms of me having technical skills. I'm not looking for an industry job. The days of me having a portfolio on LinkedIn or ArtStation are gone because this has become like a fun hobby that I do. There isn't really a good enough reason for me to upload a CV to Instagram to prove that I interned at Twitter. Nobody would be particularly impressed, and it doesn't fit with my content. But no amount of explanation is ever good enough, and so I turned all my comments off on Reels, I locked down my Discord, and I hurled nasty messages back at the people in my DMs. And I want to be clear, it is just as wrong and abusive of me to talk to people like that. It's not the vibe. A lot of my detractors, they are quite young, some of them 19 and under, and as somebody who is entering her 30s, like, it is my responsible to model kinder behavior. But situations like these scared me into taking a lot of content down, and it could have just stayed up, honestly. For example, I think I could have mitigated the claims that I was secretly a very young beginner artist if I hadn't nuked the account that I had pre-cancer. If I'd kept one or two realism-focused drawings that I'd done, or just kept some of my old content up instead of thinking I needed to disappear and return to Instagram as a perfect artiste, it would probably have been fine because there would have been a paper trail. I also regret allowing myself to be bullied into taking content down. I allowed my emotions and the negativity online to fuel how I was creating my content. And despite mutuals telling me that it was a turnoff for them, constantly changing the vibe of my studio account, I was too emotional to listen. And something else I want to mention is that I used to post paper sketches, but because I have a lot less control on modding an IRL pencil, they are shakier than works on Procreate. This is just because it's harder for me to stabilize my hand without digital brush mods. It's just the nature of being dynamically disabled. There are days when joints go burr. I got a lot of hate towards the way that I drew on paper in terms of people not liking that I chicken scratch, but Really, like, it just made me feel embarrassed, and so I took all my sketchbook pages down. I wish I would have kept them up. I had started doing paper and pencil drawing tutorials to reproduce my digital work on paper, and since I position myself as this disabled artist activist, it would have been more fitting of my message to ignore the weird comments and just do my best. But no, I was obsessed with the idea that I had to be perfect. I felt like if I wasn't a model artist in all aspects, that it would never be good enough, and so I wasn't absorbing anything in terms of learning my lesson every time somebody would come out of the woodwork to be mad at me. I was just nuking content that I thought people didn't want to see, and then I would disappear, and then I would come back, and I would try to crowd please, and when that eventually did not work, I would vamoose again. But the plus side is that now I'm very vocal about making the most of accessibility features on Procreate. I'm happy with my chicken scratch. I don't feel an urgency to change it. I'm not trying to hide my disability anymore. I wiped all of my videos of my colostomy changes, joint mobility issues, and me using adaptive tools for drawing off of TikTok, and I wish that they had stayed up. I owe the disabled community better, and I should be a more positive representation for us, and so I'm glad that nowadays I make a conscious effort to do so. Procreate in and of itself has been a huge issue as well. People are very critical of the fact that Procreate has a private image feature where you can hide images from things like time lapses, and part of the reason I use Procreate is for the hide image feature. I'm no stranger to admitting that I use it when making content for two reasons. Number one, when using nude reference models, I can't show nudity on Instagram, and a lot of my reference images are nude reference models, and this is because I was classically trained in an institution to use live models to draw. And reason number two is that a lot of my reference pictures are just me doing weird poses, and so I don't really always want to show pictures of myself on social media. I have the right to retain my own privacy, and so I'm not a stranger to the hide image feature. Recently, I've been doing a lot more screen recordings as opposed to just posting time lapses to show the process when not using a human reference and drawing from imagination. I'll be honest with you, content creation sometimes is time sensitive. I don't tend to free-form sketch as much anymore. I usually go into drawings with a concrete plan. Because I'm on a posting schedule and I do need to maximize my time between projects. And so brainstorming is required ahead of time, at least for me, because if not, I can't effectively manage my own schedule. I'm not the biggest fan of relying on imagination for things like anatomy. I would much rather rely on reference images, and often they're made from scratch by photographing friends or paying to go to art classes where models are present, because it stresses me out a lot less this way. I also just find it preferable to pose my own real people or just myself, especially if I have to like capture a weird angle. And people have asked me why I don't use like a 3D modeling software. I just don't like them. I was trained on people, so I vastly prefer people. The subreddit used to have a post with criticisms of an adopt that I made where people mentioned that the body seemed off, but that body is modeled on my body. I literally took a picture of myself and then drew what I saw. The poster thought the body was ugly and wonky, and they have no way of knowing this, but it's based on my post-cancer body during a time where I felt like shit about my appearance. I've had a huge chunk of my abdomen removed. I was literally like dented after resection surgery, and I came home medically underweight. It just wasn't a good time, and so reading a shitty comment about my own body sent me into a tailspin. And I know it's not the intent of the poster, because how would they know, right? But this is the kind of issues we run into when criticism descends into the territory of just being spiteful for no reason. My post-tumor body has been the subject of speculation for some time as well. In the Reddit and through DMs or comments or emails, I'm often accused of faking disability or lying about the tumor diagnosis. And I'm here to tell you that it is very hard to lie about a missing chunk of abdomen post-tumor, especially when there is well-documented evidence all over the internet posted by me about the damage the tumor did. I have very visible scarring. A lot of my stories on Instagram feature me running around the cancer center for appointments. I'm literally vlogging about prepping for another huge surgery I have coming up to finally be done with the cancer fiasco. Like, I'm not Boogie with a medical app claiming to have cancer. My tumor would be so impossibly hard to hide that it's laughable. And in the vein of disability, even if you think I wear braces to draw for clout, I have a colostomy bag. Like, what do you think it's attached to? The void? And so at the request of my followers, I did actually try Ibis Paint for a while. And I used to use Clip Studio every so often. But Procreate is just my favorite app. I know the functions more intimately because I've been using it for years, and I can make content using traditional drawing practices with my nude models without worrying about censoring when I post. Like I said, social media became my job in 2024, and so I have to toe the line of agreeing with advertisers and not upsetting the algorithm too badly. Like, that's why the lewd art is on Patreon. But about those hidden layers, something else I regret taking down, which I think I need to take responsibility for, is my resketch of Rudo on top of the original drawing of Rudo. And I did it that way to show in comparison the old work and how you could pretty easily just resketch her. And so I used the hidden image layer by hiding Rudo and then resketched on top of her. This added more bamboozlement than clarity, and it was disingenuous, and I apologize. I am happy to report that I have never done that again. I absolutely can admit when I've made a misstep. I have vocally admitted that I was dabbling in AI around 2019 and participated in the TikTok Wombo AI art trend. There was a trend of people using waifu labs to create a character and then drawing that character. One of my favorite OCs, Wilhelmina, is based on a waifu lab prompt. With the emergence of AI now being used for evil, like, this obviously has not aged well. When the interest around artists using Wombo AI to make abstract pictures of their OCs came to TikTok, I joined in on the trend, and I realize now that all it was doing was feeding the AI. You're willingly feeding them your artwork to train their model. And so at the present moment, in regards to trends, something like the AI microwaving your art trend is not something I would be participating in. All this to say, I'm not a stranger to using AI for things like color palette generation or making random waifus to serve as inspiration. I don't do that anymore. Now I try to take inspiration directly from the pages of artists on Pixiv or IG to avoid accidentally falling into the AI trap. And honestly, this has given me a more specified pool of reference images. It's also cool talking to the artists and asking them for tips. I've integrated a lot of them into my style. My advice for emerging artists has always been, go to the people who inspire you and ask them how they do it. It genuinely works. But obviously, the egg is on my face for the aforementioned crimes. Like, it is my bad. I'm not going to try to justify my once use of waifu labs, but I am going to assure you that I have grown past it. Your criticisms did not fall on deaf ears. Screen recording my process and making YouTube tutorials has helped me a lot in terms of showing my process. While a speed paint may feel unreliable, I've started making tutorials so you could get an in-depth look at how I operate, and I hope that this continues to inject transparency into Spazzatic Studio. Live drawing has also helped a lot because I get to make works by committee. Sometimes if we're really ambitious, we can even go from sketch to completed render. We did that for Pumpkin Night on Inktober, and it was really fun. It's been nice taking tutorial requests. I think that we learn a lot as a community, and I'm happy to sincerely engage with people. Transitioning from realism and painterly style to the anime style that I long to have was pretty tough. You can't really go from occasional weeb to Hayao Miyazaki overnight, and so I realized that in my mission to make reproductions of things that I thought were good, I had foregone developing a personal style, and this was the start of me paying out of pocket to take art classes again. I didn't know what I wanted to do, I just knew what I liked to look at, and instead of developing a style in peace, I was now desperately developing it to an audience of 15K by the end of 2024, and it's very difficult to find your unique artistic voice when you feel surmounting pressure to perform. Every time I tried to branch out into other styles or wanted to change my style or wanted to borrow elements from other creators, people saw it as proof of AI. My ability to chameleon my style and make reproductions bit me in the ass because while it was super helpful in college, because that is what you're trained to do in illustration and design, people don't necessarily see evolving or changing art styles as growth. To them, it may come across as disingenuous. And since I was an absolute nobody with no online paper trail, they found the variety of styles I used confusing. Why was it anime 1 minute and then closer to realism the next? And yeah, if you have no context on an artist and it seems like they're flip-flopping between styles, then absolutely it's confusing. I understand the hypervigilance of artists on Instagram being wary of AI tracers, and we'll get more into this later, but AI tracing is usually painfully easy to spot because it's done by artists who don't have any knowledge of the form, and so they're no better than the AI at guessing where things go. For example, pupils and accessories. AI just isn't good at details. It's certainly clear when people trace the AI quote-unquote detailing because they're no better at moving around random forms than the machine. In the subreddit, I got heat for the wonkiness of the pupils and the inner eye on Yuri, but truth be told, what I was trying to do was just sunlight dappled on water, and so I made these honeycomb-like shapes. And in a way, like, yeah, I was guessing. I was guessing because I wanted to switch up the way I was drawing eyes, but I was trying to figure out how exactly to get this effect across. And so ask yourself, is guessing where things go always wrong in art? Like, can't we stab in the dark and just try, regardless of how polished it turns out? When are artists not allowed anymore to make mistakes? And many of the accusations laundered towards me are on the basis of just straight up mistakes. Mistakes that I've openly said, yeah, I fucked up here. If I could redo that in the drawing, I have ideas on how I could improve, especially when it comes to over-rendering hair. I hate Fluttershy and the bunny girl's hair because now when I look at them, I kick myself for the dumbest mistakes ever. If I would have just started over, it would have been fine, but I made the pig-headed decision to stick with these sinking ships. Do as I say, not as I do. Now, after a year of consistent posting, I have a gallery full of improvement instead of desperate reproductions because I'm beginning to carve out a style unique to me. There's more evidence than there once was that I've been in the industry for years and received a formal education and internship in illustration and design. You can flip through story highlights and now YouTube videos full of ye old college photos and catch live streams of me drawing where I take requests and make tutorials by committee. And honestly, the influx of AI accusations have gone down because now there's a wealth of evidence at your disposal to show that, yeah, it is me drawing these things. It's lit that fire under my ass to continue making tutorials and show my process, and what felt like a chore is now one of my favorite things to do. I love making little videos for all 47 of you to see how I draw. I don't feel like I'm jumping from artist to try to bottle what makes them special. I'm figuring out what makes me special. Now, obviously, I have friends on Instagram who are professional artists, and they've seen me draw. Some of them I've known in the industry for 17 years. We went to art school together. They've been around me forever, watching me to make art. They went on to graduate from the same college as me and work in design. But I think I'm beginning to emerge from their shadows. I don't compare myself to everybody and wonder whose style I need to quote-unquote steal in order to be good enough. Or, how can I make myself seem serious? Do I have to give up on the things that I want to draw? I just believe that I am good enough, and I want to be liked for me, even when there's stupid mistakes, and it isn't perfect. And so speaking of improvement, let's actually look at a handful of my pieces, and I'll tell you my criticisms of them, r/artist hates criticisms of them, and some context on their creation so we can understand together how past works and current works have been informed by my previous experimentation. We're going to be covering works in the order I made them, so Rudo, Fluttershy, Cream, Yuri. and Peach. I disqualified some other works like Luca because I did her in one horrible sleepless night due to deadlines, and it's just not a fair representation of anything I can do technically. I'm not super jazzed with it. I wish that I had had more time. I also have very minor criticisms of Robin. It's mostly criticisms that are a running theme, and I don't want to repeat the same things over and over again because I do want this video to be relatively short. And Yukari just isn't interesting compositionally, so I don't really have much to talk about with her. And that having been said, I figured we'd deal with my most hotly debated works first, and then if there's demand, you can always ask me to do a part 2 to this video, and maybe we'll talk about some other art. So, without further ado, let's do it. Rudo! Rudo meant a lot to me because post-palliative care, I made it my mission to connect to the Legend of Zelda, which sounds odd, but I really was the #1 hater of the franchise for like the longest time. Having literally nothing else to do and really wanting to love the games, I played them all in order, and my favorite character of Ocarina of Time has always been sassy kid Princess Rudo. Not to get overly sentimental, but The Legend of Zelda really helped me overcome anxious psychosis. I used to play it with a walkthrough open, so I didn't have any downtime to like think and panic, and it got me through a lot of my evenings, especially when my family went back to work and I was alone all day, instead of constantly sort of looking for signs that my post-op body was falling apart. I would microwave a grocery store pizza and play Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. Without The Legend of Zelda, there would be no Spazzatic Studio, which is kind of funny to think about. I'll admit that there was an earlier version of this Rudo whose hair was just overall much more true to her Zora head shape. I thought I wasn't doing it justice, so I went with the bob instead because I knew I was going to post this one, and the I have to be perfect mentality was in full swing, and so I denied myself a lot of artistic liberties. I should have just taken them. Like, I wanted to do blue skin, I chickened out. I wanted to do the hair in the shape of the Zora head, I chickened out. I don't have too many criticisms of Rudo other than me thinking the crown was a serve, and oh my god, it is not. I wanted to do the rocks from Majora's Mask. Obviously, it is not translating at all. You can really tell here that I had no direction for the eyes. I'm just throwing colors at the wall and seeing what sticks. By the time Fluttershy comes around, I'm beginning to branch out a little more, but at this point, I was wholly unsure of what I was trying to emulate. People often call my style over-rendered, and yeah, it is. The AI brain rot unfortunately did get to me. A lot of those oversaturated, overlined, over-rendered pieces that you find on the internet are actually machine-made. And I even got recently, I was on Pinterest and I was sure what I was looking at was human artwork, and then I saw the little like AI thing under the photo and my heart broke in the middle of doing a warm-up sketch, no less. So like, yeah, no wonder it's difficult to replicate over-rendering. I don't think anybody can. But I was pretty married to the over-rendering for the better half of 2024. I really wanted to emulate camo, and so something that I used to do a lot was use multiple lines to line the piece. So to differentiate things like highlights or shadows, I would add 1 to 2 colors to show the change in tones. I do a very different version of this now, where using an airbrush, I very gently suggest a bit of a secondary skin tone, usually a blush tone, so that when I do my soft and hard shading, it auto-differentiates because whatever is placed under the airbrush is made more saturated. The use of both soft and hard shading has confused people for some time in my art, and I later also introduced cross-hatching. Something that I've stolen from AI is that a lot of the shadows are actually blushing and then with a hard edge, cut in a crisp way. So the way we can do this is just to put down blush and then cut it off at the sides. And I still do this for noses, but I also Gaussian blur to 1% and then use a modded blending brush to melt the blush into the skin tone. I like differentiating features with blush like noses. It's something I see a ton of in Google Images, which are AI generated. But I don't know, I think I can steal from the robot overlords. The shading on the hair is also atrocious. I don't even want to talk about the eyelashes. I knew I liked fluffy lashes, and you can see the beginning of me figuring out how to do fluffy bottom lashes. But again, in this case, I'm trying to be camo or taoid, and I am failing miserably. I thought that since I had Camo's Course 101 in my back pocket, which by the way, you should totally take it, and just slapped all the different functions of Clip Studio together, it would all sort of come together, and it did not. Much more fabric studying would be needed, and I regret Googling anime girl blue hair for reference pictures, because boy did I think I was getting a leg up on AI by trying to do what the AI was doing, but no, I could totally do it better. Like, no girl, you can't, because you're just throwing techniques at a wall and hoping that it works out. You can also tell I'm relying way too heavily on the default Procreate round paintbrush. I'm using it to fill negative space and deposit swaths of color. You can absolutely use the round paintbrush to do that, by the way, but I think now that I've modded it and then modded the blending round brush that comes with Procreate, it's helped me exponentially. You can't rely on Gaussian blur to blend colors. It's just not enough. So first attempt back at digital art. The bones of Rudo get a solid 4 out of 10. I've always been a big fan of very round, very chubby faces. I think AI is also a big fan of round faces. And so for this reason, it was easy to find reference pictures to fit the vibe I was looking for. But because those images can't be replicated, it's miserable to use them as references, and so the rendering is just meh, 3 out of 10. You can tell I poorly mastered Camo's tips here without really understanding how to apply them. This was my first foray into things like clipping masks or different lighting settings for layers. It was also the first time that I really experimented with line weights. Now, I have it down to a science that I can understand at this point in time because I know what I don't like, and I just skip steps that I don't enjoy doing because, like, art should be fun. Anything that is tedious I have cut out of my process. This was enough of a struggle with Rudo. I can't imagine it would have been any better if I'd attempted the blue skin, so maybe that was a blessing in disguise. I also don't understand why I included her adult earrings, but then the water temple metal? I could have just done big orbs like the ones on her head. Okay, I take it back. 2 out of 10. I don't know what I was thinking. The subreddit mentioned that it seems like the artist, me, doesn't have a solid understanding of where things go, and yeah, 100%. My original plan was to stick to black and white crisp line art for the entire studio page because I felt like I had a handle on drawing people, but not on rendering. I wanted to be a no rendering page because I was afraid of it. I found Procreate overwhelming, and I found the amount of functions you had in digital art to be intimidating. But I faced my fear by force at the last second and ended up coloring in Rudo. That's why my We're Back post is just lines. I remember rendering Rudo with my handwritten Course 101 notes and trying to apply technical painting logic like we do in real life to the skin. And considering I flunked my painting classes in college, I cannot imagine why I did this. F's all around for you, Spazz. Fluttershy. What did Twitter call this? The bald pony. The 15-year-olds were so correct to dunk on me for this 5-head. I don't know what I was doing. My biggest regret with Fluttershy was the random attempt at doing camo-style eyes. Because I wasn't paying close enough attention, I forgot to color in one of the whites and I left a hole, and so you could see the background color. She had a splotch of random green out of nowhere. I could not for the life of me also figure out where the waterline was meant to be, and this nonsense continues until Peach, when it finally dawned on me that I could just do Gyaru eyes for everybody. And the Gyaru eyes for me have become a staple because I can have my fluffy top and bottom lashes, and I think it looks great. For Chotomate, I've watered down my style to make it easily replicable so that I would have some sort of expediency when illustrating the chapters. I saw stylized eyes on Pixiv, and I've sort of hybridized the styles together, but for now I knew I wanted to have wide open eyes with a visible waterline. You can tell I'm still poorly mastering the default round brush pen here. These are the closest the eyes I do nowadays get, where I use the airbrush at the end to marry the mid-tone and the darkest color. It's like 2004 Moe style, but not quite. But obviously the central gripe I have is that front bang. I distinctly remember rendering the fluffy bangs and then looking lovingly upon my creation before I realized, oh my god, Fluttershy never had bangs in the show, and this is a classic case of you should have just erased it and started over, but because I'm stubborn, I really thought I could fix it. I made a similar goof with my bunny x spastic girl character for the giveaway with Kira Bun. It was the night before the deadline and I was rendering pigtails at like 4 a.m. And I remember posting the drawing and having this moment of clarity of like, I could have just copied the left pigtail with the lasso tool and then pasted it and spinned it around. Like, why am I literally my own undoing? Fluttershy has become kind of famous as an image people think is just AI generated, so not traced, just generated and posted, and that no drawing has been done at all. These people are wrong. I was just bad at rendering. You can see an attempt at Aegyosa, but like the Reddit points out, it's very clumsy. In regards to the hair, I do have a tendency to over-render, but also just to draw too many strands, it ends up looking almost like fur, as if there's layers and layers and layers of hair. I'm not super sure why or when I started doing this. I think that it's just something that sort of happened over time. You can see it here in these unrendered drawings. It's just too many strands. It's been super unsustainable for me to continue to over-render this way. As I sort of develop the style of how I do hair, I'm not really married to any one technique, but because this is tedious, I'm trying to phase it out. Something else I've stopped doing out of convenience is actually adding double lids. So I've seen anime style artists do this thing where they'll add a regular lid and then the marker of the halfway point between the eyelid and the eyebrow. I think for droopy-eyed characters or characters who need to emote a little more, this is useful, but I'm more conservative with my use of it at this point. I had originally also done it with Sableye, but then people asked me why it looked like her eyebrow was floating, and I realized that what looked good to me was not coming across the way that I wanted it to. And so again, feedback by committee is genuinely useful. I actually don't enjoy doing hair shading. I've tried a lot of different styles, including painterly style. Shout out to my homie Aiko Kenshi for letting me copy her for a while, but so far nothing's stuck. These days I just like to throw colors on with a square paintbrush and then start erasing lines so it looks like it follows the direction of the hair. As a gesture drawer primarily, suggesting shapes works out best for me. I don't really utilize the sketch much because I like to worry about details later on in the drawing process. So for example, now that I've redrawn Fluttershy and screen recorded it, I suggested the vague shape of all these crazy strands, but I'm going to deal with it later when I whip out the inking pen. When I'm sketching, I try not to think, or I'll get caught up for 45 minutes on stupid details, and that's why I like gesture drawing. It's expedient. It's been pointed out to me that I don't use any markers to suggest volume in a sketch. It's just not geometric. And yeah, I never noticed it before, but it's true. Like, I've never felt like using geometric shapes worked for me. It would always just be really confusing. I prefer gesture drawing, capturing a quick line of motion to get the skeleton of a general shape. And that's why chicken scratching is just the most convenient way to go about it. And then later on, I worry about what I'm inking. I'm a big scribbler and I prefer to verbally write what I'm going for detail-wise and then using the modded technical pen with a lot of stability. I just iron out the details later on. I'm a sketch scribbler. It is what it is. All of that may sound fancy if you've never done gesture drawing before, but it's literally just me being lazy. Like, that's why I've never been concerned about the chicken scratch a day in my life. Is anybody really gonna care? Like what a sketch looks like once it's erased? You're never gonna see it again once I ink, so I don't think it matters. Fluttershy was inching closer to what I wanted to accomplish. Reddit has pointed out the weirdness with the hair, and yeah, you're correct. I struggled so hard. Mistakes have helped me to simplify my rendering style. For a long time, to not drive myself insane, I focused exclusively on cell shading, hard shading for you non-weebs, because my soft shading had always been really annoyingly muddy, and the reason that it was muddy was a misunderstanding of shades and hues, which got corrected once I took the Course 101 class. It was also due to using the default round paintbrush. God damn that paintbrush. Please, for the love of God, mod your brushes. And so Fluttershy gets a solid 4 out of 10 overall. You can tell I'm inching ever closer to where we need to be at this point. You can see I'm still over rendering, but I don't really have like a clear direction. I just wanted to be in the ballpark of Kamochiru, but like can't really do that when you don't have Kamochiru skill. And this is a good time to point out, for all the years that I had an aversion to learning how to render, doing it bootcamp style all at once did not propel me into greatness. There's a lot to be said about incremental changes over time. Slow and steady wins the race. You shouldn't shy away from things which make you insecure. Just try it, even if you think it's going to turn out bad. Just do it incrementally over time. So again, do as I say, not as I do. Okay, so Cream is a bit of a disaster from conception. I had it in my head that Cream the rabbit, the character, was older because when I was a kid and I played the Sonic games, I guess I figured we were just in the same age bracket. And so mid-sketch, when I realized that I should have probably just looked it up and discovered she was 8, I was like, oh, should this be her mom instead? But like, I don't know. I don't like the character of the mom. I really wanted to draw Cream. So I did an aged up Cream. Like again, don't be stubborn like me. Just return to the drawing board. I mean, I guess aged up Cream is fine. I mean, she's a cartoon rabbit. I don't think she'll care. So for all intents and purposes, this is college-aged Cream the rabbit. People have pretty intense criticisms of Cream, and a lot of them are just stylistic choices on my part which did not land because, again, I did not yet have the skill to bring them to fruition. For example, why can you see her skin through the fabric? Basically, and this might just be a me thing, a cheaper or thinner white button-up. You know when the light hits it and you can see the skin through the white of the shirt? That's what I was going for. Somebody later pointed out to me that it looks like the shirt is wet, and I was like, oh. So again, this is a case of me thinking that I'm cooking like the triple eyelid effect on Fluttershy, but in reality, I lack the skills to tell a comprehensive compository story here. So shout out to all my super cool senior artists, because you guys have helped me out over the years, and taking the time to really examine my art with me has been helpful. And if you're watching this, hi Dominic, this includes you. Cream is honestly one of my favorite works. Like, I still like her. I think you can see that the camo classes have begun to click. A lot of the weird lining is gone. The line weights are better, they're clearer. And while the thinned bottom lashes are still making an appearance, this was a real turning point for me. It was time at last to really get selective about reference images, and this is when I started posting more of my process, which we're about to get into. I've kept a lot of over-rendering cues, but I've watered them down to be less time-wasting in my more recent works. I still like over-rendering to a certain degree, but I agree with the public that at a certain point, enough is enough and it stops looking good, especially eyebrows. I just make them the same color as the lining nowadays, and I'm really into these little like scribble brows. They convey enough emotion without driving me nuts as to how to render eyebrow hair, as I'm a maximalist. I also find my older works are like too overstimulating. I'm getting really tired of that style. I've turned instead recently to things like textures to get across sort of the different textures and volumes and fabrics of things that will appear in my composition, and that's been a lot more fun and I enjoy it a lot more. So Cream, who was finally propelling me into the right direction, gets a 5 out of 10. I'm inching so close to not just applying the knowledge I'd paid to learn on Course 101, but I'm employing it sensically and practically. You can see that something is beginning to genuinely click. Yuri. I love Yuri. Don't take that out of context. Yuri felt like the first work where I truly understood what I was doing. It didn't feel like I was stabbing in the dark to try to get concepts to shoehorn into my limited skills. I really had direction. Yuri's sketch layer took me about 14 hours. I remember that very clearly. As a chronic drawing deleter when I'm done, don't ask, my iPad is so old it barely survives Procreate. that number of hours is burned into my brain because yeah, I remember working on Yuri so hard. I remember babysitting my 90-something-year-old grandmother, and every second that she would like nod off to sleep, I would scurry to her kitchen table to like frantically draw. Yuri is one of the drawings though that Reddit is convinced, again, was not drawn at all, but rather completely AI generated, so let's dispel that. In terms of the ribbon, I know it's a little sad looking. That's just how I do them. It's a consistent theme in all my drawings. In regards to the eyes, it's a dappled sunlight on water texture. I thought I was going to stick with that forever. Obviously I have not, but I've always loved textures. The soul of the piece really is in the eyes, and I think in Yuri you can tell here that I'm really on a mission to inject more life into my pieces. My previous work feels shy, it feels like it's hiding something from us. This Yuri seems much less shy. It's like incredibly in your face. The weird cuts here are because I made a custom Canva canvas, and I knew that I wanted this to be a print. It just made my life easier to pre-cut the works that I wanted to print out. In terms of Natsuki, I've gotten better at drawing these little doll guys. I recently did one in my Miku piece. It's Kaito! You know those weird like felt dolls that cost a fortune, but it feels like they're really cheaply made? I wanted to do that. Turns out, for once, the thing that was missing was my love of textures. Also about that shading, this is where I was in full gear adding cross-hatching to my works, as well as soft and hard shading. The thing that you're seeing is cross-hatching. The color of the skirt is also unlike the game sprite. This is just artistic liberty. I thought it looked better this way. That's literally it. In terms of the hair, I've always done it this way. It's not melting into the floor. It's meant to be like the curl is sort of laying flat on its side, like a really deflated ringlet. I too have criticisms of the way that this was drawn. It does genuinely kind of feel like I gave up on the shading, and that's my bad. Okay. Conspiracy theories debunked. So now, where Reddit does have a point is in the marshmallow clothes Yuri is wearing. I don't see the marshy goodness, but I understand that the shading is still juvenile. The shading on her clothes was pretty solid overall, at least for this point in my attempts to render, but I agree that the secondary colors need work. My gripe is really with the intensity of the colors. Some of my shadows are too dark and they're throwing off the vibe of the piece. You can tell that I'm still poorly using the round brush to add highlights on the chest, and I really don't like the outstretched arm. It never dawned on me until I was perusing Reddit, but the shadows here are weirdly dark, and they should have at the very least have been soft shading as opposed to cell shading. Now would be a good time for the gradient with my almighty airbrush. The main issue with Yuri is the way that she was posted. I really didn't help myself in the vein of AI allegations, so it is true that my sketches are very rudimentary. I just don't like complicating my life. And so for Yuri I did my usual, which was to make a very basic guideline sketch and then technical pen over it. And this is where I realized my mistake and did not, again, immediately correct myself. I made the underpainting partially orange, and when I lowered the opacity, it did not show up properly on the speed paint. It also doesn't help that Procreate doesn't show lasso tool adjustments when they're small, and so I shot myself in the foot so hard, I went back to get footage of the undersketch so we can more clearly see it here. 14 hours of technical pen doesn't really mean anything if you suck at posting and documenting the process, and so this was a lesson in disguise because it forced me to get really serious about the quality of the posts I was making. I agree with the Redditors who were unhappy with the lack of things like speed paints in my early posting. You're right, I didn't realize how important it was to include them, and so nowadays I really go the extra mile to even screen record as I draw because I want to capture the process. The process is like 85% of posting. People want to see it. My weird obsession with everything having to seem perfectly, perfect without trying came for the final time at that point to bite me right in the ass. You can also tell that I started modding my brushes pretty heavily here. Note the smear as I experimented with blending brushes. I feel like I've got it down to something of a science now because the colors melt nicely into each other, but I think it's because I'm not trying to go 0 to 100. my shading style is just simpler. A cuter Y2K style suits me best. It's been a blessing on my joints, my brain, my stress, but we can't always be doing super cute stuff. If I need a clear understanding of a character, I do revert to the basic, generic, but autonomically mostly correct anime style. I'm a big believer in the slighter scale of simplified drawings, changing the amount of detail needed to suit your mood and, of course, your needs. For example, I don't think I've ever spent 14 hours sketching an adopt, at least not a $5 to $10 one. For Yuri's sweater, I used a fun stamp brush. This was the beginning of me using stamp brushes. I've gotten really into stamps because I love textures. I like supporting artists on Gumroad and Etsy, and it's fun to go ham with little bows and things. It's changed the way I fundamentally draw. Instead of stamping a lot of the time, I just draw something like a bow or a ribbon as though it were the stamp. Using life hacks isn't always cheating. You can learn a thing or two from being a creature of habit. So I do still like Yuri. She's just alright in terms of what I can do now. It's like the halfway point between my super old style mid-pandemic and my 2024 forays into being a serious artiste. Sometimes I do still hate rendering, but I think that coloring requires you to have fun, to want to spend that 14 hours on a piece. Like, you need to find a style which works for you, because that's half the motivation to try right there. And so, for all her crimes, Yuri gets a 6 out of 10, but the posts I made about her get a 0 out of 10, because that was a total mismanagement of my social media page. Okay. So, Peach! You can tell that she was meant to be a print because of the way I cropped my image. I was still knee-deep in my, prepping illustrations to be prints before there was even interest for prints phase on Canva. I really fought a lot with the concept for Peach. I couldn't decide what I wanted. I reuse a lot of my old line art when I think I do a good job. Yuri and early Umeko kind of have the same face shape because of this. Sometimes the muscle memory comes through for me, and sometimes I'll reuse old line art. But obviously I don't reuse line art on things like commissions. But if I'm just drawing for me, who cares? I do it the most with my filler posts because, like I said, they're just innocuous filler. This saves time. This was the beginning of the pierced Garu trend, and I tried to hold off the urge to give all my characters piercings, but I cannot resist the call. Doing the Garu makeup really gave my eyes direction. Peach was a good litmus test for what stylistic elements I wanted to keep versus scrap. By the time Sableye came around for Inktober, I had totally pivoted into cute territory. I was also starting to do this trick where you clipping mask the lashes, fill them with a lighter color, and Gaussian blur. And I'm still not 100% married to my style of doing eyes, but it's honestly fine. I think a distinctive style comes with time, and since I consider 2024 to be my first official year back after many years of just fooling around, I've come into 2025 with more clarity as to what I want going forward. I'll include a list of artists in the caption, which I find especially inspiring, who by emulating their style over time and listening to their directions, I've been able to stumble and fall into my own distinctive drawing patterns. So Peach is a good mix of my pitfalls and my triumphs. You can tell I'm still trying to do the dappled style eyes. Recently I've been doing strictly moe. It took making the Kuromi and my melody keychains to realize that I didn't actually have an aversion to the Y2K style. I was just trying to avoid it because that's what I grew up with, and I thought that I just couldn't do the thing that I had spent 27 years looking at. But I'm tired of running from it and then being unhappy when I make stupid mistakes. Why not just go in the direction of my happiness? I think that I nailed the pearlescent bubbles, and while I still stand by my semi-translucent sleeves, I don't like Peach's hair. I had a very specific reference picture, but again, when you're fussed with time crunches and not quality, you tend to overlook things which may pose a problem later on. In 2025, I'm trying to make mindful changes so my pieces have longevity and I can feel happy to look at them a year later. That being said, though, anything could happen at this point. We could literally swing in the opposite direction completely and uncute everything I've ever drawn. We'll see when I do my yearly recap on what's changed at the end of this year. The clearest rendition of this camo-esque style that I wanted to do was actually when I fully rendered Mermaid Chan, and I realized it wasn't the medium that I was struggling with, it was the mood of the piece. Artists like Camo and Teoid have specific moods which their pieces inhabit, and these moods don't match my art. I have a tendency, for whatever reason, to gravitate towards cute, which is hilarious because in my waking life, I'm a vampire/romance goth, but one thing seems to be clear, Y2K style has me in a chokehold, and for good reason. I am a child of the 90s, I grew up in peak Y2K, and I was a teenager throughout the 2010s. So I've seen us transition as a species from chuggy to bland to beige, and now back to being cringe yet free. I guess it makes sense that the aesthetic you spend so much time running from is where you end up, and ain't that a pickle? The mood for Mermaid Chan finally matched the references I was using, meaning Camo's entire body of work, and so it clicked into place, and this is when I realized we had to go back to the drawing board because not only was I going to have to find a happy medium for my manga, but I needed to figure out what to do with these cutesy ideas I had. And so Inktober was actually really formative for me in 2024 because when I went full Moe Y2K style, I found that there were aspects that I loved stealing from that style. For example, the weird chubby fingers and noodle anatomy. It's been really fun. Sometimes characters have these weird sharp nubs, like they have poorly fleshed out nails, and I have yoinked that for myself. I also love to decoupage and collage in my free time, and so I realized, why was I stressing myself out trying to perfect a style that just wasn't meant for me? By leaning into what I grew up with, the familiar has helped me move outside my comfort zone and grow. It's like visiting your childhood home as an adult. It's comforting and familiar, even if you've changed over the years. So what was the point of this video in the end? I wanted to do an honest critique of things which I could improve on, and boy, were there a ton. I apologize for seeming disingenuous in the past and for not educating myself on online norms before posting full time. These are my wrongs, and I'm happy to report that they won't happen again. It feels good to show who I am as a person, a year into posting full time and making this my official, honest-to-God day job. This has been my dream always, even when I tried to suppress it. I want to continue making art for you for years to come, and I can't wait to document, in detail this time, the process of doing so. And I love the input, I really do. I hope you leave some constructive comments on how you think I can improve, or even what kind of content you'd like to see from me. I have a vision for the first time ever of what I really want Spazz Studio to be, and it's just me. I don't want to be Camo or Teoid or Fortihara, I just want to be me. So thank you again, friendos, to everybody who has loved my work or given me criticism. My heartiest and most genuine thank you. And of course, to my patrons who are lovely enough to hang out with me, a very big hug to Spicy Knife, Milk, First Last, Sakura, Rocktrix P, Adi, Gwen, Cat, Leo, Delta Animations, Not a Necro Wizard, Akusan.com, Big Monkey, Ari, Noop, Andrea, and Blake. If you want to access more exclusive tutorials and free bases to help you along in your own art journey, come join my free Patreon tier. Free 99, baby. I post almost every day. Come hang out on Instagram, and if you enjoy chatting about life and the trials of dealing with post-cancer nonsense, consider checking out my second channel, Spazz After Dark, where I vlog. You can also join our amazing community of artists on Discord and Twitch via my website, www.spazzaticstudio.com, and if you're curious about my manga in the works, you can read it on the site for free. I hope this was enjoyable for you guys. Do swingle the jingle and oingle that boingle, like, comment, and subscribe even. Let me know if I should make a part 2 of art critique, and I'll see you really soon for the Donna Beneviento video. Stay weird!